observing 2nd of Samuel. The first book of Samuel we've already gone through. It's a moment in which a woman calls out to the Lord to have a son in the first book of Samuel. And this woman, she has a child, and his name is Samuel. Samuel is a transitional leader. He very much is part of the transition of where there is a moment where God is governing what's known as a theocracy, and then it transitions into a monarchy where now there is a physical king sitting on the throne by petition of the people. Samuel is not that king, but Samuel is that transitional leader, and Saul becomes the first king, and then Saul is given some instructions to follow, to which he fails the first time, and then he's given some new instructions, and he fails yet again. And in the first time that he fails, he is told that because he has failed, there isn't going to be this prolonging of his kingdom, meaning he's not going to be a king for a long time. And then the second time he fails, he's told that no one of his family is going to inherit the kingdom, if not that God has prepared someone who will sit on the throne. That someone, we later on find out, is David. Samuel goes to Jesse's house, anoints David to be king. And even though David was anointed, there's a period from when he's anointed to when he becomes king, a period in which we see him fight with Goliath, a period where we see him run away from Saul, who wanted to kill him, where he builds a bond with Jonathan, the son of Saul, where he is married, and then married again, and then married again. And so when we finally reach chapter 2, we see this moment where Saul has died at battle, and Jonathan as well. And David is king in Hebron, and then later of all of Israel. And then he wants to establish a capital for the nation. And so this is where he goes on pursuit to find what is later known as Jerusalem. Jerusalem is now formed as what will be the capital. And one of the things that he finds that they need is the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant was this furniture, for lack of a better word, that resembled or symbolized the glory of God. And it was a chest, a golden chest, that had a golden lid. On top of the lid sat two angels facing each other, and there was a golden rod that would go across from it. And the way to be carried was by the golden rods. Unfortunately, we know that they didn't do that the first time when they tried to transport it. That leads to the death of a particular individual, but they also leave the Ark of the Covenant in a man's home who, in those 12 months or so, he saw God's blessing. And once David finds out that that man sees God's blessing, he's like, okay, maybe now it's safe to go get the Ark of the Covenant. And he brings it to Jerusalem. This is where he celebrates. And what we see is that David, in that after that celebration, he is conquering lands. And so when we look at 2nd Samuel chapter 8, the Bible tells us that his reputation was widespread because of all the victories he was having. And then in chapter 9, we see that he is so happy because of the victories that he's having and all the territories that he's claiming, that he then says, who shall I bless? And of course, this is when he fulfills the promise he made to Jonathan, where he calls Mephibosheth, who is from the house of Jonathan, so that he may be blessed. Mephibosheth has the blessing where he's going to sit at the table with David to eat there all the days of his life. Not only that, but David gives back the lands of Saul to Mephibosheth, so he restores him in glory. And then in chapter 10, David is still in this happy mood. He is in this mood where he is victorious, where he's rejoicing, where he's seeing the favor of God. And so he's in a very jovial mood. And what happens is that he finds out that there's a king whose father has passed away. And he wants to pay his respects to them. And so he sends his servants, and says they serve him as he needs fit. Of course, that particular king, he receives bad counsel, which is what we read last week. He receives bad counsel, and he sees this not as a gesture of friendship and goodwill. He sees it, and of course his advisory board says, hey, David is just sending his servants so they can spy on you and then they can take over. And so this good gesture leads to a battle, and to the point that when you read at the end of chapter 10, the general comes out and fights in the battle, and David comes out and fights in the battle. This is why then it's attributed that David killed about 40,000 men at that particular battle. And so the king or the commander of an army going to battle wasn't uncommon. In fact, it was common. While in some countries, the commander-in-chief of the army would sit back, maybe at a high place or at a specific base, to receive report or see what's happening. The habit and the custom at this particular juncture is that the commander would go out to the battlefield at a particular moment, rather when they were losing or just to make sure they had a decisive victory. And so it is not uncommon for that to happen. But what we see with David in chapter 11, which is what we're going to be reading today, is that David suffers from what's known as victory disease. And victory disease is this particular moment when you receive continual victories back to back to back, where it leads to arrogance, and it leads to cockiness, and it leads to a lack of proper strategizing, and thus it causes you the victory. Not that you could not have won it, but because you were in this drunkenness of victory, in this drunkenness of success, you find yourself losing. We're going to see this happen to David. And so let's start off right now. 2nd of Samuel, chapter 11. And we'll just go verse by verse as we've done before. So let's start off with verse 1 to 5 so that we can see, again, David has what's known as victory disease. And this often includes ignoring military intelligence. Right? You can have all the people around you giving you the proper advice, telling you what to look at, what to observe. But if you think that you've got the battle won just because you've won 50 battles before, then you're obviously going to walk into a situation. Interestingly enough, one of the symptoms of victory disease is when people try to go into a battle using strategies they've used before, because it worked once before, they think it'll work again. And we'll see that much later resonate with David's life. But here we go in chapter 11, 2nd book of Samuel, chapter 11. Let's look at the first 5 verses.
In the spring, when kings marched out to war, David sent Joab with his officers and all Israel. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah. But David remained in Jerusalem. One evening, David got up from his bed and strolled around on the roof of the palace. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing, a very beautiful woman. So David sent someone to inquire about her. And he said, "Isn't this Bathsheba, daughter of Elam and wife of Uriah the Hittite?" David sent messengers to get her, and when she came to him, he slept with her. Now she had just been purifying herself from uncleanness. Afterward, she returned home. The woman conceived and sent word to inform David, "I am pregnant."
So, a couple sight words here. A couple sight words here to review. The first one is the word Saul, right? The second one to observe here is the word inquire, U-I-R-E, inquire. Then we have the word get. And another translation, it actually says the word took, depending on what translation you have. And finally, we have the word slept. And so, what I want you to observe is that temptation within itself is not bad. Temptation is right here. This is temptation. Now, it should be noted that there are a lot of beautiful people in the world. It should be noted. And so, while I am in a committed marriage, that does not stop me from acknowledging the beauty that another woman possesses. Me acknowledging the beauty of another woman doesn't take away the beauty of my wife. So there's a big difference for me to say, wow, look at how beautiful this woman looks, versus, oh my goodness. Right? There's a big difference. I had a friend of mine who would often say, the first look is for free, the second one is going to cost you. That's what he would always say. And I'm of the position that it's one thing to admire, is another thing to desire. Right? And so there's this quote of, it's one thing to have the birds fly above you, it's another thing for them to make nests on your head. Right? It's like you can observe all that, but obviously you should not covet, you should not desire. And so his seeing is not an issue on the surface if all it is that he notices. Now, interestingly enough, the way the houses were designed at that time, it's not uncommon for them to treat the roof as if it were an extension of the house. And so, you have a house with, your main entrance, and they had these railings to ensure that nobody fogged off the roof. But in order for him to get the roof, he had to use something called the stairs.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so the very interesting thing, right? So number one, him being on his roof is not like he's being a creeper and a peeping Tom. He's on his roof because it's an extension of his house.
It's like a balcony.
It's like a balcony. That's the way they're using it. So that's nothing wrong with that. Him saw a woman, that's nothing wrong with that. Him inquiring, not necessarily nothing wrong, a little shady, but nothing wrong. It's when he got or took them. That's when we enter into problem.
And cats. Or
Yeah, and you slept. Right? At this point, we got real problems. But right here, he got some real issues. Now, the very interesting thing is that, I don't know if you're familiar with stairs, so I'm just going to show you how stairs work. Stairs allow you to go up, but the very same stairs allow you to go down. So David found himself going up the stairs, and he saw, and he inquired, but if David would have taken them stairs to go down and go away, no problem. Chapter 11 is in a very different story if it says, and David stood back, David went up the stairs, looked at the balcony, said, who's that? Saw a beautiful woman, not just a beautiful woman, a very beautiful woman, and then he walked away. Done. The problem is that he started dancing with temptation. That's the problem with David. That the Bible tells us that there is no temptation that has forsaken, that has overtaken us, that no one has an experience, and that God doesn't already have an exit for it. It's like, hey David, God already has the exit. The same stairs you used to go up, use those same stairs to get out.
Yeah. And he used advantage of his power too.
Oh yes. Right? Because he saw, no problem there. Of course the Bible says she's a very beautiful woman. And, so that's something to take into consideration. There's a pastor that said, ugly doesn't tempt, and so it's like something that tempts you because it's appealing to the eye. But nevertheless, David saw, no problem. David inquired, kind of, hot waters there. But then verse number 4, David sent messengers to get. That's the problem.
But even in verse 3, when he inquired, his inquiry was the fact that he already knew who it was. Because, or at least maybe I'm reading it wrong, but David sent someone to inquire about her, and he said,
Isn't this Bathsheba?
Isn't this Bathsheba?
Yeah.
His boy's wife? And he knew the father, like he knows who this is.
So he's already seen her before.
Oh,
Exactly.
he had to because he already knew that this is Uriah's wife.
Exactly.
Now, he wanted confirmation. No problem. Maybe it's been a minute since he's seen her. And not to mention that.
Disimulando.
Yeah, not to mention that she was, when he was looking, he saw her bathing, when she was finishing up her uncleanliness, right? So her period had just ended, her menstrual cycle just finishing up, and she was cleaning up. So he was like, oh, that kind of look, but I've never seen it in that light before.
No.
So I just want to confirm what's happening here.
Right.
No problem, David.
Right there, he should have been like, okay, that's my boy's wife.
That's exactly.
Yeah.
No, at that point you should have been like, okay, I gotta get out of here.
Yeah.
Because all
I used to
temptation,
pray.
huh? all that temptation needs to become sin is an opportunity. That's all temptation needs, is an opportunity. And David here took the opportunity, which is why verse number 4, he sent messengers to get, and before number 4 is over, he had already slept. And so there's a big issue here. I also think that this speaks to another thing, which as we jump into the New Testament, we can find. And so if we go to the New Testament in the first book of Corinthians,
If we were to kind of create a ratio off of what you just did there, off of those words, so we would say, as you said, nothing wrong with Saul.
yep,
Then
nothing wrong with inquiry.
Inquiry is a slippery
Yeah,
slope.
yep,
slope.
yep.
Okay, you to get is the problem, and slept you're into deep.
Oh yeah, he's into it. And so that's why sin, temptation needs an opportunity for it to become a sin. Right? And so you may see, again, you may see someone and say, wow, beautiful individual. And okay, no problem, you admire. If you admire, that's it, there's no problem there. If you desire, that's a heart issue, it's an entirely different issue. But if all you did was desire, done deal. And maybe you say, wow, so beautiful, wonder who that is. And then you find out who that is, it's like, that's enough. You admired, and you know who it is. Leave it alone. But then be like, yeah, but I wonder, what's in a wonder ball? Like, you know, it's like your whole life, right?
Yeah.
So sin only, temptation only needs opportunity. And the worst part is this, again, David on his roof, that's not a problem, because that's an extension of his house. David not even going to the battlefield, while it was not custom for the commander to stay back, one could say, well, maybe it wasn't time for him to go yet. We saw him in chapter 10. He didn't go right away. He waited, and then when necessary, he went out. So one could say that. But here's what 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 12 tells us. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 12 says, so whoever thinks he stands must be careful not to fall. Now, that's the Christian Standard Bible translation. Let me read it to you in the Amplified Bible. In the Amplified Bible, it reads this way. Therefore, let one who thinks he stands firm, immune to temptation, being overconfident and self-righteous, take care that he does not fall into sin and condemnation. That right there is the problem with David. He thinks he is immune. He thinks, I've won all these battles, I'm good. I've conquered all this territory, I'm good. No, the moment you think you're good is the moment you're not good. That's the issue here with David.
Is it not just on his victories, but also, well, I've seen the glory of God. I've seen his favor. Like, I know God got me kind of mentality. Is that also in there?
It's possible, but in this particular chapter, we only hear the name of the Lord once. And it doesn't come out of David's mouth. So that's an issue, and it's very telling of what we see from David. There's another New Testament verse I want to share with you, which is the book of Romans. And in the book of Romans, chapter 12, verse 3. Chapter 12, verse 3. So I think that the issue with David here is that he is experiencing what's known as victory disease. I think he is drunk with the overwhelming sensation of having had victory over victory over victory, expansion and expansion and expansion, blessing and blessing and blessing, that he's like, I can do no wrong. I got the what is the Michelin touch. Everything I touch turns into gold. I'm good. I'm impervious. I'm immune to all of this. But of course, the moment you start thinking that way, we've already read 1 Corinthians that says if you think you're immune to that way, immune to temptation, you need to take real care of where you're standing. Here's Romans chapter 12, verse 3.
For by the grace given to me, I tell everyone among you not to think of himself more highly than he should think. Instead, think sensibly, as God has distributed a measure of faith to each one.
right? So we should not have this high concept of ourselves that I'm good. I'm a vet. I've been around.
Like conceited and arrogant.
For sure. Very, very much so. But it's a byproduct of this idea of, I've been in this for so long, I've been winning for so long, I don't even know what losing smells like. It's like, yeah, well,
That's when you're gonna start losing.
that's when you're gonna start losing.
All we do is win.
Yeah, all we do is win. It's like, well, the Bible says you shouldn't have a higher thought of yourself. Right? And the moment that I start thinking, I'm good, I'm impervious, I'm immune to all these things, and nothing can hold me, I'm all the way up, it's like, okay, no problem. Right? No problem.
It's like Nebuchadnezzar when God told him not to say that, he got everything on his own because he didn't. God provided it for him. And the day that he said, "Oh, this is mine, I got this," that's when he had to go into the field and eat like an animal.
Exactly, right. So he was on his balcony and said, this is the great Babylon that I've created. Like, all right, you forgot that God has allowed this. David, I believe, forgot what had taken him and provided all the things that he has experienced. And so playing with temptation at this point, dancing with temptation, he's probably thinking, I'm good as well. And so we return back to 2 Samuel. We look at 2 Samuel chapter 11, and let's look at verse 6 to 11.
It's not documented. So maybe this question is asked, but is it possible that David had done something like this before?
No.
Okay.
I'm going to say no definitively, only because of what the last verse 26, 27 says. Based off of that, I'm going to say he hadn't done something like this. In fact, when you talk about David, the most famous stories of David is him versus Goliath and him losing the temptation of Bathsheba.
Right.
And those are the most popular stories. A battle like this is a battle we haven't seen him have before, which is the battle of the flesh. Right? Which speaks to us because, I'm not trying to judge our brother David. But it goes back to the thing of, I can't think, we cannot forget that what has been renewed in our life is our spirit. We were spiritually dead and now we are spiritually alive. And yet we still carry with this flesh, with the desires of the flesh, the wants of the flesh, and that means that there is a sinful nature still tied to us that won't be removed until we have reached the kingdom of God. And until then, if we ever think, I'm good, it's like, no, that's the issue. This is the issue that happens with David. This is the issue that can happen to any of us, which is why we are warned about that type of attitude. And so we look at 2 Samuel chapter 11, verse 6. It says, David sent orders to Joab. Joab is the commander of his army. He sent orders to Joab, send me Uriah the Hittite. So Joab sent Uriah to David. When Uriah came to him, David asked how Joab and the troops were doing and how the war was going. Then he said to Uriah, go down to your house and wash your feet. So Uriah left the palace, and a gift from the king followed him. But Uriah slept at the door of the palace with all his master's servants. He did not go down to his house. When it was reported to David, Uriah didn't go home. David questioned Uriah, haven't you just come from a journey? Why didn't you go home? Uriah answered David, the ark, Israel, and Judah are dwelling in tents, and my master Joab and his soldiers are camping in the open field. How can I enter my house to eat and drink and sleep with my wife? As surely as you live by your life, I will not do this. Now this is very interesting. Uriah is concerned about one thing, the ark of the Lord, which represented the presence of God. David hasn't mentioned God at all in these 11 verses. And newsflash, he ain't going to mention him for the rest of the story. Right? Because David is not focused on that. David is focused on one thing, hiding his sin. He was led by temptation to be with Uriah's wife, and now Uriah's wife is pregnant, so some weeks have gone by, and now he's got this plan. And the plan is, I will have him come and be with his wife. And when he's with his wife, I can justify, or I don't even have to try to justify, people will conclude he came back from the battlefield, slept with his wife, there goes the baby. But Uriah is not willing to leave his post. Charles Spurgeon said the following, as soon as ever we are conscious of sin, the right thing is not to begin to reason with the sin, or to wait until we have brought ourselves into a proper state of heart about it, but to go at once and confess the transgressions unto the Lord, here and then. And the idea is that David here is not wanting to confess. He's wanting to cover up his sin, which is an issue upon a bigger issue. It's like, you already saw, you already inquired, you already took, you already slept, she's about to give birth, and instead of saying, okay, let me repent from all these things, he's like, how can I hide it?
Now, is it okay? So him as king, if he would have confessed, like, oh yo, I slipped up, I did this, like, would the consequences have been, oh well, there was adultery, they have to be stoned, or him being king, it would have been like, okay, well, I've confessed, now let's move on. Being that he is the authority figure, of course he would have to take account to God. However, him being essentially the top, that is like, oh, I'm pardoned.
Yeah. So certainly, I think maybe that ego of I'm okay. But what most commentators seem to suggest is that if David had sinned, which he did, he should have confessed his sin to the Lord and to Uriah, because his sin was not only against God but also against Uriah. But in doing so, he would doubly have to humble himself, which at this point, ain't no way he's doing that.
He's just doubling down.
Yeah. He ain't if he ain't humbling himself to God.
The sin is getting bigger and bigger.
Exactly. Yeah. If he ain't humbling himself to God, he sure ain't gonna do it to a soldier that he just pulled out of the war.
Right.
Hey, that ain't happening. And that's not where David is right now. Now David's idea is have Uriah come, have Uriah eat, sleep, be with his wife, and then send them back to the war. That's essentially what it seems to be.
Right.
But we see that Uriah is concerned again about the ark of the Lord, which is symbolized the presence of God. He's concerned about Judah, of Israel, which is the country, the nation. He's also concerned about the soldiers. He's concerned about everything that once used to be the concern of David. But David's focus is so off cue that now he's just focused on one thing. How can I hide this sin before it comes to light?
To make his brain go wacko.
Yeah. So let's look at verse 12 and 13. Verse 12 and 13.
I don't think it really got to do with her on why he went, is the fact that there was already a separation between his devotion to the Lord. That when that temptation arose, then it's like, oh yeah, I'm gonna take this opportunity.
Yeah. So I will get to it in just a minute. Let's read verse 12 and 13.
Stay here today also. David said to Uriah, and tomorrow I will send you back. So Uriah stayed in Jerusalem that day and the next. Then David invited Uriah to eat and drink with him, and David got him drunk. He went out in the evening to lie down on his cot with his master's servant, but he did not go home.
So I'm sure you've seen the infomercials where when they say, hey, we're selling this marker for $9.99, but if you act now, you can get it for $6.99. Or maybe they say something along the lines of, act now because there's only a limited amount supply. And we've seen this with all types of stuff, right? Where they say there's a limited number, right? That's called a scarcity tactic. The idea is that because there's only a limited amount, then I better move in urgency. And this is why you see people, for example, on Black Friday, where they're like, hey, we only got 1,000 TVs, or we only have 100, and they're all on sale, so you gotta move now. And people make these long lines because I don't want to miss out. So what David does first is that he makes it seem like this is a time for you to rest. For Uriah, this is a time for you to rest. Go home, be with your wife. It also says that he gave him some gifts. It says go rest, relax for a minute, recover, and then go back to the war. But Uriah's devotion doesn't allow him to rest in a time of battle. So then because this doesn't work, he uses this scarcity tactic where he says, okay, fine, I'll send you back to the battlefield tomorrow. And what he does is that he gives them an abundance of food, of drinking, and he gives them access to everything, because the idea is take everything you can now, because tomorrow you're going back to war. So in his mind, he's like, okay, I couldn't get him with rest, so I'll get him with scarcity. Act now, because tomorrow's not guaranteed. And so he gets all the food, he gets all the beverage. Ideally, you're also going to get your wife, because act now, tomorrow's not guaranteed. But the devotion of this man does not allow him to go home and be with his wife.
You thought if everybody's going through all this, and I'm like the captain or something like that, I'm going to go through it with them.
Now there's another idea. Some commentators suggest that Uriah may have known something was up. Some commentators suggest that because David was so insistent on Uriah being with his wife, that it is possible that Uriah was like, there's something going on here, even if I don't know what it is, so I'm not going to be with her. There's no biblical context for me to prove that, but again, that's just an idea that's out there. And I think it is very interesting if that is the case, but what we do know for sure is that he first uses rest as an excuse, and then he uses scarcity, like you better act now, because when are you ever going to have another opportunity like this? And so we think about what David has done is that he has been a victim of temptation, not a victim, but he fell into temptation, when he walked into it. He embraced it with open arms. He danced with temptation and became a part of it. And so what he is doing right now is that he is tempting someone else. Which is a very interesting thing, right? Because he was first a tool of blessing in chapter 10, a tool of blessing in chapter 9, a tool of blessing and victory in chapter 8. God's been using him. And in chapter 11, God ain't using him no more. This is an entirely different David who has sinned, and now he is tempting Uriah to sin. Well, how would Uriah sin by being with his wife? Because he would be acting selfishly versus being concerned on the things of the Lord.
Uriah is also one of I don't remember the exact word that they used early on in 1 Samuel, but he was part of those like 400 vagabond men that followed David and supported him. So his loyalty to the army, his loyalty to God, and his loyalty to David, we see within his statements of like, I can't go home because how can I enjoy these benefits when everybody's at war, and him being at least from what I've studied, him being from the original 400, he held a rank within the army, and such as like an offer where he set up the battles or formation and whatnot, and we know that what Joab is clearly the commander or the highest officer, but Uriah, and that brings us back to verse 3 where he's like, hold on, ain't this Uriah's wife? It's like, as you said, like I ain't never seen her in this light before. Right. But it raises that question where it's like we see his loyalty, and Uriah's name means Jehovah's light. Mm-hmm. So it's like we can see his devotion and that being the vessel of the Lord.
Yeah. And so again, David right now he is in himself. Right, he has allowed sin, and so I think this is a very good illustration of the idea that sin doesn't change people. Sin has clearly changed David. His motives, the way he moves, he's trying to be subtle. I don't think he's coming across as subtle as he thinks he's coming across. There's no strategy. There's just he's desperate. He's
And he might have
moving
been showing that too.
exactly.
Out of his character.
Yeah, entirely out of the character that we've seen from David. So we now saw David try to offer rest to Uriah. Uriah says no. So he uses scarcity. He says, okay, act now. Get all you can eat, get all you can drink, act now, because if you never get this again, you're going to war tomorrow, and tomorrow isn't guaranteed. But this doesn't deter Uriah from what he's focused on. And so we look at verse number 14. So 2 Samuel chapter 11. Let's look at verse 14 to 17. Verse 14 to 17.
The next morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it with Uriah. In the letter he wrote, put Uriah in the front of the fiercest fighting, then withdraw from him so that he is strucken down and dies. When Joab was besieged the city, he put Uriah in place where he knew the best enemy soldiers were. When the men of the city came out and attacked Joab, and some of the men from David's soldiers fell in battle, Uriah the Hittite also died.
So David's first attempt to cover his sin was to have Uriah find rest in the arms of Bathsheba. That didn't happen. David's second attempt to cover his sin was to create this
God bless you.
Thank you. Was to create this scarcity mindset of you better act now, eat all you can, drink all you can, be with your wife, because tomorrow is guaranteed. That didn't work. So his last attempt to cover his sin was that he was going to put Uriah in the heat of the battle. Uriah was going to die, and then David would be the hero. How? Because he, in honor of Uriah, would take the widow as his wife.
And he gives him the letter. He gives
And
us
he-
that letter to her.
Yep, for him to take the
That's
battle.
messed up.
Right? And so this is David trying to make himself look like the hero. He's like, well, I can't cover it up by you being the dad of the kid. I guess I'll have to just be the dad. And so his thought is, Uriah will go in the heat of the battle, Uriah will die, and then I'll take her as my wife. I've got no other choice. And then if the kid is mine or not, it doesn't matter. No one's going to question it because at that point she's my wife. And David would be in very much good light. At least that's David's intention. But again, David has not repented. That's the issue, right? David has not repented. And again, not once as we enter into verse 18, not once has David mentioned the name of God. And the very interesting thing is that in chapter number 10, when they are going to go into battle against the Amorites, we saw Joab speak to the military, and he says, remember who we're doing this for. We're doing it for God and for country, essentially. And that's the first time we hear Joab speak that way, because in other times, Joab was the type of guy who would just straight up kill people. He didn't care. Yeah, he would just do it. So, but it seemed like David's faith, David's hope, David's righteousness was rubbing off on Joab, and that now Joab in chapter 10 is telling the people, we're doing this for God and country. I think the same way that positive effect may have rubbed off on Joab, we now are going to see as well that victory disease, that drunkenness of pride and ego rubs off as well on Joab and the entire army. We'll see it now as we jump into verse 18. So we'll read 18 and let's go all the way to 25.
Joab sent someone to report to David all the details of the battle. He commanded the messenger, when you finish telling the king all the details of the battle, if the king's anger gets stirred up and he asks you, why did you get so close to the city to fight? Didn't you realize they would shoot from the top of the wall at Thebes, who struck Amimelech, the son of Jerubbaal? Didn't a woman drop an upper milestone on him from the top of the wall so that he died? Why did you get so close to the wall? Then say, your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead also. Then the messenger left. When he arrived, he reported to David all that Joab had sent him to tell. The messenger reported to David, the men gained the advantage over us and came out against us in the field, but we counterattacked right up to the entrance of the gate. However, the anchor shot down on your soldiers from the top of the wall, and some of the king's soldiers died. Your servant Uriah the Hittite is also dead. David told the messenger, say this to Joab, don't let this matter upset you because the sword devours all alike. Intensify your fight against the city and demolish it. Encourage him.
And so we see that Joab here doesn't make some smart decisions. In verse 21, I'll write it right here. We're not going to read it, but at least I'll write it right here. You can review it in your own time if you'd like. Verse 21 refers to a story in the book of Judges. And in the book of Judges, chapter number 9, verse 50 to 57, there's a story of a woman who uses a millstone, which is what David is referring to, and she uses the millstone, throws it over the wall, and it falls on the man's head. Most likely when you read the story, you're like, oh, that's what you're talking about, because you probably heard before how the woman brought victory to the people. That's what David is saying to them. You're getting so close to the wall without realizing, number one, that the archers have the top ground, high ground, and they can, with their arrows, destroy you. That's number one. But number two, you're also running a risk because look at how a woman in the book of Judges brought victory to the people by throwing a millstone over the head of an individual. So that's what David is referring to there. And so we're seeing that even Joab isn't using good judgment in the battlefield. Or even Joab seems to be a little, maybe a little confused, but most likely a little drunk on the victories himself. If David is confident enough to not have to come to the battlefield, then why should I worry? If David is confident enough to not move or lift a finger, then why should I worry? Some commentators suggest that Joab might have been a little bothered because David had the ability of writing all these beautiful letters, but when he wanted something dirty to be done, he used Joab, such as essentially the killing of Uriah. But what we see is that Joab uses the messenger to hide his own errors with the quote-unquote good news that Uriah is dead. And so Joab made some error judgments in the battlefield, but David is making some error judgments in his own life. So we see the influence that David has. As I mentioned, and as you've seen, in the last 25 verses, we haven't heard the name of God not once. And the only one who even spoke remotely close about God is already dead, and he was talking about the ark of the Lord, which is Uriah. David has not once mentioned God. His focus is not on God, but we're about to hear the name of God. Look at verse 26. Verse 26 says, when Uriah's wife heard that her husband, Uriah, had died, she mourned for him. When the time of mourning ended, David had her brought to his house. She became his wife and bore him a son. However, the Lord considered what David had done to be evil. This is the only time we hear God's name in this chapter. This is very telling. That means that God was silent, but he wasn't blind as to what was happening. And oftentimes we confuse God's silence with that he is also blind to what's happening. No. He's silent, but he's allowing things to develop. Another thing to the previous point of, is it possible that this may have happened before? But I don't think this happened before, because we're seeing that God was bothered with what David had done. And there's this idea that it is possible that Bathsheba didn't know the degree of what David was planning. There's this idea that Bathsheba didn't know, and this is why she genuinely mourned the death of her husband, because she just didn't know. She didn't know that David was going to have him killed, or that David had him killed. However, there's this other idea that while she was sad because of the passing of her husband, she might have been in the inside a little glad, because at least she knew David was going to take care of her. And so, even though it's for lack of a better word, it sucks that Uriah died, in her mind it may have been a thing where she at least knew socially, economically, she was going to be all right, because no one was going to have her with the title of an adulteress. No one was going to look at her as just a sorrowing widow. If not, that she was going to move up in the social scale of now being the wife of the king. And so Uriah's death leads to some sort of promotion for her, because now she is the wife of the king. And so David's first attempt to hide his sin was rest. Take it easy. It's okay. The battle will handle itself. Uriah doesn't give in to that. The second attempt was scarcity. Hey, I'll send you to the battle tomorrow. Have everything you can eat, everything you can drink, and have your wife now. He doesn't give in to that temptation either. So he says, okay, I'll send you to the battlefield, and there you'll die. And when you die, I'll marry your wife so that I can at least look like the hero. And David is attempting to look like the hero because in honor of Uriah, he takes Bathsheba. He's such a good friend, David is, that he does this for Uriah, not for him, but for Uriah. Right? And it is possible that at this point, she maybe has a little baby bump, maybe is showing a little at this point, or trying to hide it, but no need to hide anymore. She's now the wife of a king. But David has not once repented. Now, later on, we'll talk about the repentance and what happens, but I don't want us to overlook this moment here, that the reason David is finding himself in this situation is because of his self-confidence and because of the fact that he is in what's known as this victory disease. And so I think this is a lesson to us that we should never feel too comfortable to think that, as I've heard people say, I've got the devil under my feet, or I've got hell in my back pocket. It's like all those nonsense. No, the devil is under the feet of Christ Jesus, and Christ lives in me, so I'm victorious through Christ Jesus. That's it. And I know that's a long sentence, and it doesn't sound good as a tweet or a Facebook post, but that's the reality of it. And to think otherwise, it is dangerous and detrimental to our lives. And as we consider where David was in chapter 8, 9, and 10, chapter 11 seems like an entirely different David. And it is a different David, because this is exactly what sin does. Sin modifies, sin transforms, sin distorts, sin changes, and even more so when we refuse to repent, acknowledge, and walk away from it.
We're not above sin. Nobody is.
Yeah, nobody is. There's this thing where we saw why did Joseph run? I'm sure he didn't run because she was ugly. Like, she must have been very beautiful. The Bible don't say she was beautiful, but it also don't say she had a butterfly. Like, it didn't say that she was messed up in the face.
Right.
It said that he ran, and if he ran, it's because he was tempted. And so that should be the idea that we have, that we should look for the opportunity to run away, not towards. David apparently forgot about that story and forgot about, and it's very interesting. We'll say this in one church of prayer. As I was reading and just meditating on this lesson, it's interesting because when Samuel goes to the house of Jesse, Jesse presents his sons, and Samuel looks at them, and Samuel's like, oh, this is the one. Like, they're soldiers, they're strong men, very well built. This is the one that God says, nope, that's not the one. This is the one, nope, that's not the one. And he goes down the line thinking, these gotta be it. Any of these would do. And God is like, nope, these ain't it. Because you're looking at the exterior, I'm looking at the interior. And it is David who is chosen, that while he is small in stature, he's the youngest, he's never been in a battlefield because he wasn't of age, yet God knew the potential and the design that God had for him. So in that moment, when Samuel was looking at the outside, God was looking at the inside. And we look here at this story of chapter 11. David is more concerned about the outside appearance than at the inward appearance. And that's an issue. That is a massive issue because he has, what a long way he's gone from that young kid who was called out to this moment in chapter 11 where he not once mentioned the name of the Lord. I believe it's Psalm 32 that's kind of attributed to this situation because then we hear him say, when I was quiet, my bones got weak. It's like, yeah, when you didn't mention God's name, that's exactly what happened. We'll talk more about that in the coming week, but for right now, let's make prayer and we'll give conclusion to today's conversation of the first book of Samuel. We've got the